Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome back to our brand new season 4. It's been going strong. We've had so many great guests, and today is no exception.
I know. Welcome back, everyone.
I know. It's really good. Marissa, back onto the microphone for more duties. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. You know, I'm always very happy to be part of this. We're so glad you could all join us today for another great conversation. And today we have a guest in the studio who has also featured in season 1.
Yes,
Dr.
indeed.
Sian Williams. Welcome, Sian.
Welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you in the studio.
I know. It's good to be back in Perth.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I love every time we're like, oh, we're going to talk to Sian. Oh, is she still in New Zealand? No, she's back in Perth. So, no, very, very happy to have you in our studio. And as some of our listeners may recall, the last time we spoke to you, we spoke a whole lot about muscle, which I think is what you're really well known for, is muscle. And you're definitely my go-to muscle person. But your research interests are really quite diverse. And today we'll be talking about a paper that is just hot off the press, published in Developmental Medicine Child Neurology in January 2024, and it is titled Prioritize Strategies to Improve Diagnosis and Early Management of Cerebral Palsy for both Māori and non-Māori families. How cool.
Like all podcasts, though, before we got stuck into it, even though we know about you from season 1, I'm sure a lot's changed between now and then with all your developing research. So I'm going to tell everyone a bit of a refresher on you, Sian.
Get ready to squirm, and it's always so awkward, but here we go.
Okay. Dr. Sian Williams is a senior lecturer at the School of Allied Health, Curtin University, and postdoctoral fellow with the Australasian Cerebral Palsy Clinical Trials Network, based in Auckland, New Zealand. The key focus of Sian's work in New Zealand has centred on the early detection of cerebral palsy, supporting the training and implementation of key diagnostic tools for earlier detection, and the generation of new knowledge around current practice, with a large emphasis on involving the family perspective and identifying potential inequities in service access. Further to this, Sian is also working to understand impaired muscle growth in infants born prematurely and at risk of neurological injury, seeking to understand the relationship between delayed and impaired musculoskeletal growth, motor development, and neurological injury. Wow.
It's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
It's wide-ranging. I really love that. It's really cool. And it keeps research so relevant. There's so many different aspects that we look into. And today will be definitely one of those, delving into a new area. But before we do that, we do have to do the icebreaker, right?
I love this question.
Do you?
I have lots of answers, but I'll only give you one, don't worry. So the question, Sian, is what was your dream job as a kid, and do you remember why you thought so?
So I actually had to think about this quite hard, and I wonder if maybe I wasn't very ambitious as a child, because I don't think I had a dream job. I'm the youngest of 3, and so I was always wanting to just play with my 2 older sisters, and I think that was part of my focus, was really trying to get them to play with me, and failing that I was just using my imagination to keep myself entertained.
Yeah,
so
I love that.
I think that's actually transferred into the way I approach or where I've gone in a career pathway, is working with kids and making things fun and entertaining and playing games all the time. So
you're just
maybe it worked out well.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
That is very cool. Good answer.
I really like that.
Dana?
Well, see, okay, so mine is definitely not very profound at all. I remember going through many, many phases. My first phase was I think a lot of children did want to do this as well. I just wanted to be an archaeologist because I thought I would love just to dig up places. And I remember just going along to, when you go to playgrounds and you've got sand pits, you'll be digging things up thinking, I might find some treasures here. And then eventually I wanted to make sure I could discover maybe a new dinosaur, and I was really into that. So I had these scrapbooks, and then I became like maybe a bit of a conspiracy theorist as well, because I was living in Canada. So it was Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, and I really believed in all that. And it was during that time in the 80s, there was a lot of movies on aliens and abductions, and I was like collecting newspaper articles and all these things. And then I evolved to wanting to be a vet. And then somehow I ended up being a physio. I really don't know how that connected. I have no idea. But it was diverse and wild, and there was definitely a huge amount of imagination, I would say, which is probably the similar feature there.
I love it. I love it. Look, mine changed a little bit too. So I have older siblings, but I was with a big age gap, so I was often the only one at home. And I remember in January watching a lot of the Hopman Cup and Australian Open, and then being determined at the age of like 9 I was going to be a tennis player, having never played tennis. So I went to the carport where we had a wall, and I would just hit the ball against the wall, and I'd practice. And then I started doing tennis lessons, and I was dead set I wanted to be a tennis player. obviously hasn't
Wow.
eventuated. And to be honest, I never played beyond the age of 12. But yeah, that was what I wanted to do at that particular point.
That's really cool. But I love how like you can see things that do inspire you like along the way, and that's really cool. But you know, you can still play tennis. There's this thing called pickleball now, and I haven't played it yet, but everyone seems to be playing pickleball.
We need to look into this. I haven't either. I don't actually. I need to YouTube.
You could be a champion pickleball player. So it's not too late.
Okay.
It's not too late. All right, well, let's get into today's conversation. So let me give you a bit of a rundown of what we'll be talking about today. So improving service delivery and enabling earlier detection of cerebral palsy is a priority globally. So for example, work from Australia and the USA has been informing and trialling new methods of care. However, this requires the addition of local and culturally specific information to ensure that they are transferable to individual countries and health settings. The aim of this paper was to identify prioritised strategies to support improvements in early health service delivery around the diagnosis and management of cerebral palsy for both Māori and non-Māori individuals. Using a participatory approach, healthcare professionals and the parents of children with cerebral palsy attended co-designed workshops on the topic of early diagnosis and management. The results revealed the critical need for improved communication, support and guidance, as well as education for families navigating their child with cerebral palsy through the healthcare system.
Such an interesting paper, Sian.
Yes.
And what I love is we know already, and from our other discussions in the past on the podcast, we know there's a lot of knowledge now about the vital importance of early intervention. But what is vital and what your paper really looked like is translating that across different settings and obviously making sure it's fair and equitable in terms of who can access that early intervention. So to start with, can you give us some background about the specific challenges that are faced in Aotearoa in New Zealand with regards to cerebral palsy?
Yeah, sure. So we actually did a few different studies just trying to capture what the context was of diagnosis and that early management pathway was in New Zealand. So we were starting to get this picture of, yes, there is a delay in diagnosis. If we look at that, you can diagnose under 6 months of age. We were seeing an average age of around 19 months.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
We were seeing that not only that from the cerebral palsy register data, but we could also see from the family perspective. We did a survey and found that, whilst about 60% of families did perceive that their child might have had cerebral palsy under the age of 6 months, only about 20% of them were actually getting that diagnosis. So the families themselves were perceiving this delay. From the clinician perspective, we were asking them about their awareness and use of tools, and they were, there was a huge movement in wanting and knowing and wanting to use these tools and knowing about them. The actual application and use of those tools, there was a bit of a barrier. So we knew that there was a lot of work to be done, and we wanted to make sure it's a slow process, but we wanted to make sure it's done right. And getting that family perspective was really important. In New Zealand, there's a number of different health districts, I suppose, if you call it. So there's a few different approaches to healthcare that are slightly different, so different pathways.
Right, okay.
In New Zealand, you don't need a diagnosis to receive access to or referral to intervention, so which is a really great thing in some aspects, but in other aspects, perhaps it doesn't push that need for a diagnosis. And so what we'd also hear stories of with a lot of allied health professionals, they might be seeing a young child who might be referred to them for, let's face it, for cerebral palsy for those similar reasons. But the family hadn't been given a diagnosis. Perhaps in some cases they'd never heard of it. And so we've got this allied health professional working with the child on these particular impairments, working towards something, but can't have that communication, can't target particular pathways because they are scared or worried or can't talk about cerebral palsy. So there was a bit of a disconnect there happening too, and that made it quite hard for clinicians, but also the families as well, who are wanting that information and wanting answers and clear ways forwards.
Of course, that early, I guess, like you said, just for the family itself in terms of awareness of what's happening and what's causing those motor delays is important. So with all of that in mind then, setting into the study, what was your main aim or focus?
So I think we were just really trying to get the context of what was happening. To implement any change, we need to make sure we really have a good understanding of the context. And for us, that was a cultural context, which is why we held our co-design sessions in 2 different sort of regions with different kind of ethnic focus groups.
Yeah.
And so we're really trying to look at what was the experiences and what are the prioritised solutions that from the perspectives of everyone involved.
Yeah.
So families and the health professionals who are working in that space.
I love that. When I read through your methodology, I found it incredibly interesting. There were a lot of words there that I recognised, but put together was just a new combination. So it was a participatory approach with co-design workshops. I'd love you to go into a bit of detail about what that actually is, because it's really unique, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think co-design is a word that's used it's kind of a bit of a buzzword.
It's a bit of a buzzword. It's a research buzzword for sure.
Yeah. So I guess I think if you people have that understanding quite well, I think if the idea with the participatory approach is that you are getting people really involved in not just the talking about I guess you could talk the problems or the experiences, but also planning out the actual solutions. So really actually working in there and participating together, so not a separate workshop for these people and a separate workshop for these, and then us as the researchers combine it. It is literally everyone in the same room working together on that. Yeah. So there's different ways. I mean, going into that approach, it was really interesting. There's a lot of health professionals in particular that were a bit nervous with. For sure. They were saying, are the families going to feel comfortable talking to us? Is it going to be a negative experience? Is it just going to be a venting session? But it really wasn't like that in the end. And there were different approaches that were used to try to make sure there was a balance and no power imbalance, I guess. And if anything, we were favouring the families in the room. So, it was a really interesting process.
Such an interesting process.
Great idea, though, to get the real, like you said, to know really where the gaps are and then what you need to do.
Yeah.
And how did you, because that's a great point that you had so many different people in there, but how did you, what strategies did you use to optimise inclusion so that everyone felt like they could say what they were thinking and could participate, I suppose?
Yeah, so we had facilitators that helped run this, and they were unbiased. So I think if I was in there running it myself, I would have been like, and say this and do this and direct them. So we had people who were somewhat external and removed. So that was quite important. Yeah. And we made sure that we followed sort of for the Maori workshops, we had cultural processes in place that made sure everyone felt comfortable and it was a safe space. So we had a local katiaki, which was a sort of a health worker in the local region who is able to follow processes. And we had kai, which is food, and we had blessings, and we just followed correct suitable processes that made everyone feel really welcome. Amazing. And then the facilitators really set up different activities like arts and crafts almost, really to make it very open, a very open space and really encourage that conversation. And there was no quiet time. It was everyone we needed more time really because people just wanted to keep talking. Good. They wanted to be heard, both the health professionals and their families. So it was really great.
Shows the power of it, Yeah,
it shows that even however many years after an experience, how fresh and how emotive it can still be and how much they can remember such fine details and want to be heard and want to, for some people it was the first time they were really opening up about it and reflecting on it. So
it's quite emotional as well, really, isn't
definitely.
it, to go through that process?
Yeah.
So how many people were included in this? Do you know those numbers off the top of your head?
We were aiming for, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, it's in the paper, but roughly around 6 of each health professional and family member per workshop.
That's a nice number.
So it's, keeping it manageable. It had to be important that it was face-to-face, which during COVID times that was a bit difficult, so we had to be mindful of that. As I mentioned before, we had we're trying to make sure that we had, if anything, more family members and health professionals. So even on the day, if a health professional was, a family member was unwell and was cancelling, I was like, oh my gosh, do I need to cancel a health professional? It's just those little logistics of going, I need to make sure the balance is right.
Wow.
But it came through in the end.
Well, it just goes to show that there is rigour in these methods, right? It's not just, yes, there's power in bringing people together to have a bit of a chat, but when you're looking at it from a real research perspective, there's rigour in this methodology and even having the third parties involved, so they're facilitating and managing bias. Bias exists on any level, right? So, that sounds absolutely amazing. And I imagine from that there were really powerful stories that came through. Do any of them come to mind that you can share with us?
Look, there were tears, there was laughter, there was shared frustrations, just so many people discovering and learning new things, even about their child's condition, even in the room that they'd never heard of. I remember it's not necessarily one of the experiences, CP itself, but it was one of the experiences of co-design was we had one mother sharing a particularly painful experience and, was getting quite teary, and the kaitiaki sort of stopped us all, and we all sung a song showing love to her. And I did not know the song, and I just mouthed along and bobbed my head. But it was this moment of, because it was a different approach for me. I'm not Maori. I'm not as familiar as them, but it was a really amazing experience that I just, you could see the pain in her and then the love that she was getting from everyone. And then going forwards with the rest of the workshop, it really just, everyone was on the same playing field and really open in sharing their experiences.
Gosh,
so it was full on. Yeah, I learned after the first session to bring tissues. And we had extra boxes of tissues in the room. It was really amazing sessions to be a part of.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it is so precious when you are sharing a story, you're giving so much. It's a process for the person as well, but you're giving a story over which is so personal, and so that needs to be treated so carefully and respectfully, and it just sounds like that environment was facilitated beautifully.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Yeah.
Now to get into your data and kind of what you pull from these things, which is what I really am excited to talk through, is that there were three primary themes that were generated from your data, and I'd love to explore each of these. But we'll start with the clinician, family and communication. And can you elaborate on the communication challenges families faced and what they shared, and then what could be recommended to make improvements?
It was quite interesting because it comes through in a lot of other research as well. And I remember listening to this like real time in the sessions that people wanted communication to be honest and open and ongoing. And it just it's one of those things I could hear them all speaking about and coming to these same conclusions that it's like, we had identified this in a survey, we'd identified this in another country. We're finding these similar storylines coming through. Talking about the word cerebral palsy and maybe if not using a diagnosis, it's talking about under surveillance of cerebral palsy or suspected at risk, using different terminology to say, look, this is what we're doing this assessment for, and this is what we're thinking this might be the case. And that just opens up this whole nother realm of, yes, it could panic a family member or it could panic them, but it's having that power in information and having that dialogue open so that they can ask the questions that they need at the time that they might be ready.
Right, it's not always that first appointment they're ready for
absolutely
that, right?
Not, And I think that was another really interesting point raised by everyone in the sessions is that, people might not be ready in that space, and some of the health professionals shared this idea of, can we finding out where the family's at in what they know and what their understanding is and what their observations are, and sort of learning that balance of, are they ready for this? And but that can't happen if there's no appointments or if there's no relationship being built. So that was sort of a really big point of, having that space and having that follow-up perhaps in having those discussions. And having, just simple things like having more than one person in the room for those discussions when they were happening. Because I'm sure we all have had traumatic experiences where you only capture tiny little bits of that information. So having, time and space, literally, physically, to sort of process that and have those ongoing channels of communication were important.
And I think that, I think you're right. You see communication does come up all the time, but the fact that it comes up all the time says that we're not quite there in terms of how we're delivering. We're still learning. The word that came to mind as you're describing that, and you said it beautifully as well, is relationship. I think a lot of it does come down to relationship because there's trust there, and that's the only way you can know when someone's ready for more information, because otherwise you're just taking a stab in the dark, and that stab in the dark could be very hurtful for a family at that particular time. Was there anything with regards to, because obviously everything's built so much on appointments and times and schedules, any sort of thoughts around, like, how long an appointment should be or anything like that? Because
yeah, we didn't get down to that
fast.
nitty-gritty of that,
Yeah.
but it was that idea of having opportunities for follow-up appointments.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
as you said, it's not necessarily that first appointment
Yes.
where you're ready to go. It's giving them some space and, okay, maybe it, for example, could be a week later, okay, let's check in and have another
Yes.
appointment and follow up. And do you have any questions? And having, perhaps this is where it sort of builds into some of the action solutions was around provision of guidance of how to have that communication
Yes.
and what questions could be asked
Yes.
by the families. Because I think that was another big thing that came through was about advocacy, and a lot of the families in particular in our session were so talked about how privileged they were and how they were there and they were able to speak up and talk about their experiences. But what about the people who weren't there? And what about the
Right.
people who don't have those resources and,
Yes.
the equity issues? And so there was a lot of those kind of discussions of like, how do we give them the tools so that they can also communicate effectively with their healthcare providers at the
Wow.
right time?
Yep. Yep.
So you can see
That's
it was a lot of
deep, yeah.
there's a lot of delving in.
How do you write this paper?
I
That's
know.
hard work. Okay, well, hopefully we can tie it together with the actions a little bit later, but we'll go to the second theme. So the second theme, so your study identified that service provision was a major concern. So what were the specific gaps in service provision for children with cerebral palsy and what were the thoughts around that?
Yeah, so again, it's comes back to equitable service provision. That was a big topic raised, and so that was again one of our overarching principles was equity and having a clear service map. I think I've heard from a few different people in different countries as well. Was this idea of okay, who does what? Where do I go? When am I referred to what? Or who do I have to chase up myself? And who are all these people that contact me? And sometimes you talk to these families and like, yeah, there was this lady who did this, and then I said no, because I wasn't ready then. But now on reflection, I wish they asked me again, or I didn't know who that was. I didn't know what their role was. So it's again that idea of if you come from a background, even if you're a healthcare professional yourself, it's quite difficult to understand what health services are and how do they all map together.
So confusing,
Yeah, so I think that's probably the starting point is really understanding that. What the map of services are.
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of, ideal world of one-stop shop almost approach of having teams working together so we don't have multiple appointments. That is a chance for multiple missed appointments and, that there's issues with that. If you don't show up to one, you might not miss a few more. So, so it was that idea of connecting that and maybe making an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach in a one appointment approach perhaps, and that minimises the burden as well on families of having to attend.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thought, isn't it? And I think that'll be lovely. It just the coordination of that's always another level.
Yes, and then there's more continuity of care.
There
I
would
think
be,
in that early phase, because I know obviously my only knowledge is of here in Perth, but families, particularly when there's that early, whether they've had a diagnosis or not, but their child is showing these, I guess, motor delays, and to be able to have a professional that you can go to, a healthcare professional. And I know obviously you go through early intervention and then you move on maybe to another provider, and obviously it's different in each country, but if you can get that continuity and build those relationships, I think what the family is going to take from that and therefore the child is obviously going to be huge. So if you can, it's great that you identified how to fill that gap so this doesn't really go missed. And
we did ask the participants, what is your ideal scenario? So they did give it to us, and now I guess it's our job. How do we make this work and
make it as close as we can to that if it's not possible. I think that's
and it could work beyond cerebral palsy. I think that's
true.
Of course. We focus on cerebral palsy, but so much of what we're applying or have learnt about could be translated to other conditions as well.
How great. Yeah. No, that's good.
Now the third theme, which is information provision needs, and what kinds of information do families of children with cerebral palsy need most? Yeah. And I guess how can healthcare professionals better support these needs? Because you mentioned honesty being a really big thing, and so I guess then providing what information, these families want and need most? Yeah,
so I guess it reiterates that information about open communication again and providing links to what services are and what resources are available. But I think a lot of it came down, it's important to remember that idea of what is cerebral palsy. And so a lot of the families talked about, or some families talked about the myth of cerebral palsy. So when their child got given a diagnosis, can you do some myth busting of what cerebral palsy is? Because typically we think of that GMFCS level 5. And so that's what a lot of the families sort of, that's what CP is.
That, yeah.
But it was an interesting conversation that turned around and said, that's actually not a myth. That is a proportion of children who will have that.
Yes.
But this is what the range of what cerebral palsy looks like. And this is what the range of, I think someone said something like this. I didn't know there were so many varieties of cerebral palsy, and I thought that was a really sweet,
interesting,
really clear description of, you're right, there are lots of varieties, and how we plan for that and how we manage that is really different. So I don't, again, appointment 1, I don't think that's where we get to, but it is having that information ready for them to say, okay, so this is what it can look like. This is what your diagnosis can look like.
Yes.
Might mean, might be the services you might need to think about when and where. So it was that looking ahead as well when they were ready.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is tricky.
Gosh, those are great themes. And well done on putting it into 3 themes in the first place. That would not have been easy, but they're all very interconnected as well, which I think gives you that confidence knowing that you've captured it really well, like to know that you've got that.
Yeah.
Then what followed from that, and I loved, so this is table 3, everyone, when you read the paper as well, beautifully summarised. I was very impressed how you did this, actually, to be able to present information in a way that you can really capture it. There's a lot of information there, but I thought it would be really great for us to walk through that, because these are some key overarching principles of, I guess, what are the key actions and things that you could possibly take from it. So, do you want to summarise some of that for us? And don't even know where you can start.
No, that's really difficult. Everything sort of crosses over. But, I have already touched on a little bit about this idea of providing that information. You could provide an education toolkit for parents, and that could be, that guide, and that could give that link and the maps and allowing them to fill in the information of who's in care of their child and what their roles are, and really having that toolkit there ready for them to access when their headspace allows for it.
Sure, yeah. And would that toolkit was there any sort of format, like, paper format?
We did,
digital,
there was a few people who, because apps, there's an app for that, there's a, or a website, and there are so many really amazing resources out there. So part of what we did start with was following this was actually starting to link them to trusted, reputable, local based resources and information sheets and things like that. So that was a really easy starting point. But I think it's, there's so much on the internet that it can be quite overwhelming. And then suddenly they're looking at something and it's in America. Or it's in a different country, or even in Australia. So it was really working in what's a regional, what's a local
that's important.
Educational toolkit that that we could point them to. And that's also for healthcare professionals too. Because I think that's, you want the best for your patient. So having that toolkit ready for them.
That's a good idea.
Great. Love that.
The other one was regional early detection and management hubs. And again, this is pretty blue sky. Like, but how? We've started to see some evidence from different places around the world of the success in having these kind of a clinic, sort of one clinic approach, I suppose, in terms of bringing that diagnosis down. But that is where that's what the families were suggesting, and that again, ideal scenarios. And these services would help for coordination and making that, again, kind of a one-stop shop approach would be really handy. And again, that could also feed into this idea of that our other sort of action solution was about appointment and service navigation management system. So again, that could be an app, or it could just be paper-based. There were some families who definitely said, there's too much things online, I want something paper-based. So having those different options would be great, and having passing the control over to families in managing their appointments and their approaches was also identified as something that they would find helpful. And just really small, very quick fixes, but having reminders set up, or having a flag on an appointment management system of, hey, this child is at this age, have you discussed X, Y, Z?
Such a good idea.
You know, have you
Yeah.
discussed hip surveillance, for example, or
Yep.
have you discussed whatever it might be at that point?
Yeah.
And so it just prompts healthcare professionals who are so busy
Yes.
and have so many other things to consider when they're seeing this
Yes.
person in front of them. And, oh, just a quick check. You're at this age. A lot of kids find XYZ. Can we discuss
Yep.
this?
Yeah.
I love
So-
that. I mean, we were just talking a whole lot about just calendar management systems because we're really cool that way. But not everyone is going to use the calendar in the same kind of way or has that kind of experience. Yet now, if it's not in my calendar and I put reminders for everything, that's how I live my life. But, you know, can you imagine if for some families who want to use that system, you actually spend some time going through it with them and go, well, what calendar system do you have? Do you have it on your phone and do you integrate all your emails into that one? And can they come up that way? It will be a cool thing. Like if we're just going to be sending all these appointments otherwise, how are they managing it? And that's just another thing for them to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that raises that equity issue and people are already under-resourced and have so many other things going on.
Yeah.
Keeping track of these multiple appointments is really difficult.
Yeah, because we know that DNAs are, you know, they can be really high, but when we go into the reasons for it, you know, it could be something that there could be a quick fix. There could be something you could help them with, and then the other things you can sort in a different kind of way.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
I love that because whether it's transport issues or, you know, a sibling being unwell or parents juggling work and other family commitments, I think, you know, like you said, whatever you can do to set up to get the family in the best place possible to make that appointment. And I think because the more they start that process of building that relationship with their healthcare providers, they can see the benefit it's going to provide and the reassurance.
Yeah.
Regardless of if they're seeing different clinicians, if things are handed over and there's a process to follow. So,
So good.
I love all of that, Sian. It's great.
Can I ask you about the one that you've got listed under service provision as a key area as well, was the pastoral support and grief counselling? I love how you've said for both families and staff.
Yeah, that was an interesting point that we didn't think would come up, is that the health professionals said, you know, we need grief counselling, we need some help with this, because again, I suppose it's when you have these complexities and you have these big things happening in these families' lives, and these healthcare professionals are wanting the best, and they're now learning all this new evidence of, if I don't tell them, then they might have stress. But if I do tell them, they're going to be stressed. And what do I do? I'm trying to do the right thing. And also that idea of, well, if I want to refer them on, and I know that early intervention is important, but there's waiting lists. And so am I doing, you know, there's so many things that come into play. And that's also a barrier for early diagnosis, I suppose, in itself, is that, you know, if we can diagnose, but if we can't offer them much following on from that, or if there's a delay, are we doing good or bad? So there's a lot of help that we need to provide support to our healthcare professionals as well.
I love how that came out in this.
Families.
Not the intended, but it came out.
Not the it wasn't part of my hypothesis, but obviously, it was a more obvious solution or a highlighter for the families, obviously. And we know a lot about grief and stress and anxiety and you know, needing to support the families in that way. So that was a really important thing to highlight again.
That's so good, so important, really holistic, really, actually, isn't it?
I never think about it for the health professional, but it's true.
Well, I mean, you're often, you know, front face, hearing, seeing, witnessing a family go through so much grief as well, and you sometimes can be really part of that. And the stories can be really heavy. But like you said, putting that alongside what we know and the urgency of which to act on it, and then seeing all the barriers, you know, that's a lot to hold.
And I guess that also coming back to the families is being about, you know, support and being able to empower them and building their resilience and education on their child's condition, and having a strength-based approach as well to really help that empowerment going forwards, because it is that starting point of their lifelong journey. It is a big important time, not just for the development of physically, but emotionally and spiritually for the child in the family unit as well. So it's a lot of pressure, and I guess it comes back to why we need to support our healthcare professionals in that approach too.
That's a really good key take home there.
Absolutely. What I really love that you drew out there is about honesty as well, and the importance of honesty, because I think families know if there's something you're not saying, and you know, and if sometimes it's not the health professional giving it to them, then they'll look for it elsewhere, and then it might not be correct.
That's
so
right.
I really that's something I've really taken home from this, is that importance of honesty. Like you said, we balance all the other things out as well, of when is the right time for certain things, but it's not shying away from things or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm yet to hear, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I'm yet to find someone who tells me that they didn't want to know that early. Like it comes out in many different approaches, but they are saying, you know, it was stressful, it was hard. Yes, it was a hard time, but I'm glad I knew. I'm glad when I knew I could do something about it. I knew we, as physios or OTs or whatever our allied health background is, we often focus on that early intervention approach as being so physical.
Yes.
But information is actually an intervention in itself.
Yes.
So it's that giving that diagnosis or having that discussion about it could be this diagnosis opens up this whole other approach of how we could intervene for the family unit. So even if you can't get access and there's a huge waiting list to physio, there can be other things that can still be done early on.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I'd love to really delve down that area because you did list out, I mean, I love every single point when I look through this list of themes in the clinician-family communication, like honesty, open communication. I think we really are taking home that part of it. But there were some really interesting things along the language and how to, I guess, communicate. Can you go through some of those? Because they're huge.
They are huge. And I think there's no, wouldn't it be great if there was one pure guidebook on how to do it, and these are the words to use.
Yeah, you follow the lines.
Follow this, and if they say this, then do this. But there is no approach that way, and there is no perfect solution that will suit everyone. And I think that's why it was really important in our co-design is that we also did the specific workshops for Maori families, and so we could actually try to understand what their priorities were as well. And, you know, in the end, we really did find out they did want the same thing. They did want open and honest communication.
Yes.
You know, talking about using this language, strength-based approaches and what your child can do and will do and achieve was really important. But having that discussion around what cerebral palsy is and what it could be is really important. Otherwise, they do go off and Google and catastrophize, I suppose, on what, you know, what it could be and where it might not apply to their child at all.
Yeah. I guess that's such a true point because, you know, access to, you know, most people would probably have a phone that they can Google. Well, not everyone will have a laptop in different resourced areas, but you are able to just find information. So information now is available to everyone. So if we're not feeling comfortable to communicate that, people are still going to seek out information anyway. That was sort of my realization at some point where you go, actually, it is my job to communicate it and be honest with it.
And as I said, like families are suspecting something's going differently with their child, and so they are seeking information. So it can be sort of described as this kind of period of darkness while they're just searching for answers. So if they see a word or they pick up on a word like hemiplegia or something, you know, or they go off and run with that. So you as a healthcare professional having that, I don't know, having that ability to be able to discuss what that might mean or tone and, you know, head lag. People are going to search for that and find this out themselves. So if you can
find the worst case scenario probably.
And maybe it could also open up this area of mistrust perhaps if they're thinking that you're withholding information. We had a lot of stories come out with families finding out about their child's diagnosis through a referral letter. So, you know, you're being referred to see this for for orthoses, for example. And they're like, wait a minute, what's this cerebral palsy? So that would be, it's because of this kind of gaps in service provision and gaps in communication that they'd find out by accident.
That's pretty devastating.
At quite an old age of their child. So they, you know, that makes them think about, oh my gosh, what could have I done differently and what else are they withholding from us? When in actual fact, they still might have been getting the same, I don't know, therapy that they would have got anyway, perhaps in New Zealand. But that information is a really important point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. There's so much from this, Sian, and I feel like, you know, I really encourage everyone to read the paper. I mean, this is just a high-level conversation about a lot of things that are in the paper. But for you, what were the big sort of take-home messages or things that really struck you? Either confirmed your hypotheses or made you kind of go, oh, what to from here? Like, you know, was there anything like that?
Yeah, it did confirm a lot of what I'd been reading and our other research and, you know, the numbers. It was giving this really important context to the numbers.
I think that's important.
Which was really important.
Yeah.
I think it was also thinking about that, again, it reminded me that there's so much more than just this giving a diagnosis and then that's it.
Yes.
Job's done.
Yeah.
It is the follow-up and the journey that goes beyond that in terms of early management.
Yeah.
We had a few participants were saying, when's the next one and what's happening? And why have you only done this on this age group? And why can't we talk about this with 5-year-olds? And I don't have the funding, but we'll work on it. And why haven't you done this for a Pacifica group? So why can we do this on, particular different groups? And I was like, yes, this would be great because it does open, this approach really does, it allows people to have that open, shared experiences and then plan possible solutions going forwards.
It's amazing.
That some of them can be actioned pretty quickly.
Yes.
Some of them might need a bit more advocacy and lobbying to get done. Yeah.
But how good is it that you were able to identify things that you can just, we can do this now and we can really meet a need right now. That's really empowering.
Yeah.
I think it's such a good way to fill in those gaps is exactly what you did. You're getting the families and the healthcare professionals' feedback.
Yeah.
I guess, like you said, it's all about making that early intervention.
It's great feedback, isn't it?
Yeah. It's honest. It's from the source. It's not, we're not making assumptions.
Yeah.
And that way we're, getting healthcare and that early intervention diagnosis as well to be as equitable across different cultural backgrounds and things like that. So I love that about the study. It gives us this background to then be able to jump into applying all the recommendations. So after you've studied, I know there's always more on the horizon, but where to from here?
So we did jump into, and we're still ongoing work with creating some resources that are based in New Zealand and linking to other trusted resources around, even for Australia as well. And one of the really exciting projects that we have, so I should mention we work alongside the New Zealand Cerebral Palsy Society, which is a really great group who support families and people with cerebral palsy in New Zealand. But one of the really exciting projects that we have underway is the PEPI-ARC study. So that stands for Partnering Early to Provide for Infants at Risk of Cerebral Palsy. And just for those who aren't in the know, PEPI means baby in Te Reo Maori. And so ARC is that idea of surrounding and supporting and guiding them forwards.
Oh, wow.
This project is based out in Wellington in New Zealand, and it's really this early detection hub approach. So it has brought forwards all of those things that we learned about of a one-stop shop perhaps approach and bringing forwards these, we're trying to get equitable access to receiving these early assessments at the right time for high-risk babies. And then having sort of this virtual hub, also a face-to-face in-person hub if needed, and supporting healthcare professionals around the region as well in conducting these assessments. So that's a trial that's underway in Wellington at the moment. We just had our protocol paper published, which is exciting.
Fabulous.
And I think we've just finished our recruitment as well. So it was we're hopefully in the next year or so we'll be able to get some findings coming out from that. And a part of that again, it's having communication, and we're asking about equity and communication between and within healthcare professionals, but also for the families as well. So we're trying to put into action what we've learned from these other studies in Wellington. And so we're very fortunate to get some funding from the Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation to support that work.
Brilliant.
And I guess even in conducting that study, we're also starting to see bits of change, pockets of change, and that's trying to close that gap of evidence to implementation. It's slowly happening, which is really exciting to see.
That's so good, because when that happens, it's actually real lives that get impacted in a really meaningful way, isn't it? That's so huge. And I love that this has informed so much of that, which is the whole idea of research. It just keeps building on each other and directs you down the path you need to go down.
There's so many things that we knew, but we didn't have it written down by the source and by the people itself. So having that family voice has just been so powerful. Again, I keep coming back to it. There's so many healthcare professionals that want the right thing, but they're really worried about doing the wrong thing by their families by giving information, being concerned that it might be not as accurate and cause more anxiety and stress. So having this voice from our families saying, we want to know. Just even if you're not sure, but you think it might be this, just give us this information early so we can work down that pathway.
God, that's really reassuring. Gosh, that was such a good conversation.
Thank you so
really,
much,
really
Sian.
love that. It was so good. But no, we're not done just yet,
No.
of course. We're going to head now to the segment that everyone loves, Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening on this conversation and probably taking notes and doing a few ums and ahs as he's going along. All right, so before he has time for a question, Sian, I'll get you to summarise this research in about 60 seconds or so.
Oh, my goodness.
I won't pull you off stage if it's over 60 seconds. I'll just give you a little nod. And then Ed, in turn, will have time for a question. Take it away, Sian.
Okay, so we know globally how important it is now to facilitate this shift towards early diagnosis and early management for children with cerebral palsy and also their families, but it's not quite so easy to just quickly make this change in practice. So this study in particular looked at understanding the perspectives of both family members and healthcare professionals who are working in this space and really talked about their experiences and drew from those experiences to work out different ways we might change or need to keep practice the same to help improve healthcare service delivery around early detection and early management in CP.
Cool.
Oh, goodness.
That was good. You did a great job.
It's very stressful.
Well done.
60 seconds always, once you put that time on, you're
There's
like,
so many big words.
so, yeah.
Should I throw in participatory, co-design?
Researchers, we always have these huge words, don't we? And
Yeah.
acronyms for everything.
Acronyms, yeah.
Oh, golly gosh. All right, Ed, over to you.
Okay. The 60-second pitch is usually pretty tough to do. I know you guys do so much work and it's very hard to
Yes, sum up all your last work in
distill
60
that down
seconds.
into 60
Yeah,
seconds.
We
or
do
less.
it justice. I think that's our scare, is that we don't want to
Yeah,
miss
that's
out
right.
anything important.
Yeah.
Now, not to toot my own horn, I do think that it's almost as difficult for someone like myself to come up with a good question after you guys have discussed this in depth for 60 minutes.
He's been talking about this a lot lately.
And I think the conversations are great because they flow very naturally and you fill in a lot of the gaps. But that also means that most of my questions tend to disappear by the end of the talk. So let's see my little list of notes. So I guess I was going to talk about impact and implications, and just kind of what you saw as short-term and long-term impacts of your research. And I think you certainly touched on the short-term aspect of it, and I guess I'm curious about what perhaps the long-term impacts might be on like health service delivery, like for children with cerebral palsy in New Zealand. And then as an aside to that, and this is how I get to keep it as one question, considering like the whole global context, we obviously have lots of listeners from across the world. How do you think your findings and strategies could be adapted or applied in other countries, especially those with like diverse populations?
Okay, so
He's giving you two
It's giving me
questions
two
there.
parts.
Yeah, he has.
I think ultimately what we want to get out of this project or these learnings is that we want to improve, well, obviously earlier detection and earlier, better improved access to health services for children and families with cerebral palsy. But really that should at some point be extending out to other children who don't have cerebral palsy. So these other conditions.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so in our sort of, I guess you could call it health screening approaches or assessment approaches, we are going to capture more families that do not have cerebral palsy but might have something along the lines that we could still provide support for, early support for improved longer-term health outcomes. So that would be ideal. I think that's where we're going to get to with this really strong focus that a lot of us have on cerebral palsy. It's not just going to improve lives for them.
Yeah.
Obviously, this project was really focused on New Zealand, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that 26%, I think, of our families with CP are Māori, and we have, I think, about 12% are Pacific. We have a lot of different people with different backgrounds, so it's really important to acknowledge and understand the different experiences. They have this really lovely learning in New Zealand about what's good for Māori is good for all. So in a way, we do our research a bit differently and really consider how our work affects and how we should do our research differently for people with for people who are Māori, and that by doing that will actually help others. And I think it's really important for us to consider your own context of where you're trying to apply improvements in health service delivery, because ideally what will be good for them will be good for all, but there might be different priorities for different cultural groups as well.
Yeah.
So I think as well, making sure that we're not just so focused on the easier approach to doing research, which is usually sort of more robust and following protocols, and that usually means that we are focusing on the not the low-hanging fruit, but we're focusing on those people who are, it's a bit of a biased sample, and that means our approach to healthcare is going to suit them, but it might not suit the others. So I think, I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but I think it's at the end, keeping a different, using different research methods and approaches to understand the cultural and regional context of where you're working is really important.
Yeah, that's lovely. No, I really think that's a great take home. Good questions,
yes,
even though I said just one. Pushed the boundary there.
Okay.
They made sense. Well, Shani did very well through all of that. 60-second pitch and answering 2 questions. No, thank you for your time today, for sharing this work. And I really hope this highlights to everyone just the value and the importance of looking at different populations, different groups, diverse backgrounds. It's just so important because every life matters, and access and equity to services that we know are so important now is such a priority. So to all of our listeners, we will most certainly put a link of this paper on our website, researchworks.net. And if you want to keep this as part of your record for your CPD requirements, please, you can fill out a form there on our website as well. But for now, we'll say thank you, and we'll talk to you all again
Thanks for
next
having me.
time. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.